notes. I will follow the notes fairly carefully today so that we won't be too lost. If you have your Bibles, let's turn to Exodus chapter 5, and we will pick up the story there. Now, while you're finding Exodus chapter 5, let me remind you where we are. Chapter 1, God created the world. I'm going to make this a small sketch today. And my suggestion here is that the key to the world is that Adam and Eve, who are the first society, are naked. That is, that they are open, they are just, they are right with each other. And Genesis 1:28, be fruitful and increase and fill the earth and subdue it, is the first opening programmatic text. In Act 2, God judges the world in three scenes: the disobedience, and then the flood, and then the Temple of Babel. And each one of these is an act of judgment. But what's interesting here is that everybody reads it as an act of judgment, but the vocabulary of justice does not occur. Can I say that again? Everybody reads this as an act of judgment, but the vocabulary of justice or of judgment doesn't actually occur here. Now that's going to be important because today, when we come to the Exodus event, we have an act of judgment against Egypt, the plagues, and for the first time in the story, the justice vocabulary appears. So we actually have justice in action before we have justice in word. And then Act 3, which is where we'll be for a long time, God constructed a great, just, and holy nation, which I would understand to be a society, and that has a number of scenes. Scene 1 are the pioneers, Abraham and Isaac and Jacob and Rebekah, Isaac and Rebekah and Jacob and Leah, Bilhah, Zilpah, and the other one whose name I've forgotten, and then the 12 sons who become the 12 tribes of Israel. So these are the pioneers. And Joseph goes to Egypt, and he becomes the leader, and in Goshen, Joseph is very high, but 400 years later, somewhere along the line, they meet a Pharaoh who doesn't know Joseph, and Israel winds up as the poor, as the slaves, as the oppressed, and Egypt is oppressing Israel. And we looked at that last week. Exodus chapters 1, 2, and 3 are very graphic in presenting the fact that they're groaning, they're enslaved, they're pushed, they have taskmasters over them, and they are having a hard time, and they're being oppressed. So scene 2 is Joseph. Scene 3 now is the Exodus. And we'll spend our time today on the Exodus event. Now, I'd like to introduce a little bit of conceptuality and abstract structure into the storyline. Next week I'll rejoin the storyline a bit more in detail and pick it up. You have the storyline here. You see where we are in the story. Now I want to suggest that the Exodus event is the event par excellence in the Old Testament, and I think everybody agrees on that. The Old Testament picks it up, repeats it. Jesus picks it up, repeats it. The book of Revelation repeats it. It is the opening, whatever it is, that gets picked up and repeated. I'm tempted to say da-da-da-da, this, but I'm not any good at music. But you know how that's picked up and repeated, isn't it? So this is the opening signature, and it's going to be interpreted very clearly as an act of justice. There's really no dispute about that. The vocabulary here is very clear. So the central act that forms Israel, the Exodus, is understood as a justice act. Now, if you've got that, you've got the price of the lecture, all right? And since you paid nothing for it, you're all right. But let me say that again. The central formative act for the people of God is the Exodus, coupled with the giving of the law and the establishment of the tabernacle. And when you put that package together, then you have the formation of Israel. They've been delivered out of bondage, they've been given the law, they have the tabernacle, And I will suggest that all of those are clearly understood as justice matters. And the Exodus itself, that is the deliverance, is clearly labeled as such. Now, look at the notes. In chapter 3, verse 8, I had discussed with you the fact that God said he would come and rescue. And then we see that same word picked up. And really the key text for the day is Exodus chapter 6. But I want to read with you Exodus chapter 5, verse 1 first to get the feel of this. Afterwards, Moses and Aaron went to Pharaoh. This is their first time to go, and said, "This is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says, let my people go, so that they may hold a festival to me in the desert. Let them be delivered. Let them be rescued. Let them experience justice in that sense." Pharaoh said, "Who is the Lord that I should obey him and let Israel go? I do not know the Lord." Now that little phrase, "know the Lord," runs all the way through the text and is a very important submotif. Knowing God. At the end of it, Pharaoh knows the Lord. Egypt knows the Lord. Everybody knows the Lord. And they know the Lord as the bringer of justice. So this is a great missiological event. I started on this journey 30 years ago teaching theology of missions. And I'm still thinking about that. Justice is a little broader, but in paths of righteousness for his name's sake. That is, the justice event brings glory to God, as we'll see in Exodus 14, and it makes God known. And we'll talk a bit more about that in detail next week. So verse 3. Then they said, "The God of the Hebrews has met us. Now let us take a 3-day journey into the desert to offer sacrifices to the Lord our God, or he may strike us with plagues or with the sword." But the king of Egypt said, "Moses and Aaron, why are you taking the people away from their labor? Get back to work." Then Pharaoh said, "Look, the people of the land are numerous." It's our word out of Genesis 1:28. "And you are stopping them from working." That same day, Pharaoh gave orders to the slave drivers and the foremen in charge of the people, "You are no longer to supply the people with straw for making bricks. Let them go and gather their own straw." Things are getting worse before they get better. "But require them to make the same number of bricks as before. Don't reduce the quota." Now look at this next sentence. How do powerful people feel about poor people? Well, here you have it. It's classic, isn't it? Do you see it in verse 8? It's in your Bible. Pharaoh says about the Israelites, "They're lazy." They're lazy. Now let me ask you, were they lazy? Were they lazy? No, they weren't lazy, were they? I mean, I had been brought up to think, and maybe you too have been brought up to think, that poor people are poor because they're lazy. And sometimes that's true. And in the Proverbs, it says that. But it also says other things besides that. There's 2 causalities for poorness in the Proverbs. One is laziness. The other one is injustice. And we'll come to that by and by. But here you have them being called lazy. And I suggest that they're not lazy. "Let them go and sacrifice to God. Make the work harder for the men so that they keep working and pay no attention to lies." Isn't this interesting? Then the slave drivers and the foremen went out and said to the people, "This is what Pharaoh says, I will not give you any more straw. Go and get your own straw wherever you can find it, but your work will not be reduced at all." So the people scattered all over Egypt to gather the stubble to use for the straw, and the slave drivers kept pressing them, saying, "Complete the work required of you for each day, just as when you had straw." The Israelite foremen, appointed by Pharaoh's slave drivers, were beaten and were asked, "Why haven't you met the quota of bricks yesterday or today as before?" Then the Israelite foreman went and appealed to Pharaoh, "Why have you treated your servants this way? Your servants are given no straw, yet we are told, 'Make bricks.' Your servants are being beaten, but the fault is with your own people." Pharaoh said again, "Lazy. That's what you are, lazy. That is why you keep saying, 'Let us go and sacrifice to the Lord.' Now get to work. you will not be given any straw, and you must produce your full quota of bricks. The Israelite foremen realized they were in trouble when they were told, you will not reduce the number of bricks required of you each day. When they left Pharaoh, they found Moses and Aaron. Do you sense the dynamic of the story? I mean, it's not just the foremen that are in trouble. Who else is in trouble? Moses and Aaron. And they said, may the Lord look upon you and judge, there's a justice word, you. You have made us a stench to Pharaoh and his servants, and have put a sword in their hand to kill us. Things actually got worse before they got better. Moses has been called to be a bringer of justice, but things are not going well. What's the answer? Well, the answer is not to quit. The answer is to persist. And if God calls us to be involved in bringing justice in a public, dangerous way, which is what Moses is doing, and if it goes badly on the first try, do you give up? Well, Moses didn't give up. Moses returned to the Lord and said, O Lord, why have you brought trouble upon this people? Is this why you sent me? Ever since I went to Pharaoh to speak in your name, he has brought trouble upon us. And you have not rescued, Natsal is the Hebrew there, hold on to that, your people. Then, chapter 6, verse 1, then the Lord said to Moses, now you will see what I will do to Pharaoh. Because of my mighty hand, he will let them go. Because of my mighty hand, he will drive them out of his country. God said to Moses, I am the Lord. I appeared to Abraham and to Isaac and to Jacob as God Almighty, but by my name the Lord, it's Yahweh. We had that last week, I am, and the Lord, our play on that, on understanding him as Jehovah or Yahweh, or however one wants to fill in the vowels there and pronounce it. But by my name the Lord, I did not make myself known to them. Now there's trouble there, and there's things to be thought about, but this class is not going to deal with that one. That's a different class. Verse 4. I also established my covenant with them 600 years ago to give them the land of Canaan, where they lived as aliens. Moreover, I heard the groaning, and we looked at that in the last talk. So God knows about the groaning of the Israelites, whom the Egyptians are enslaving. And I have remembered my covenant. We saw that before in 2:23. Therefore, say to the Israelites, now we come to really the central text. And in the notes I've laid that out for you so you can see the 7 central verbs and how they work together, and we'll think about that. So I'm going to read this text slowly. Verse 6. Therefore say to the Israelites, I am the Lord, and I will bring you out from under the yoke of the Egyptians. I will free you. Now this is the NIV. I don't know why the NIV has switched its translation. It's Natsal. It's the word they've translated rescue elsewhere, and they obscure it for us as English readers. Otherwise, the Hebrew reader says Natsal, 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 rescue, rescue, rescue. And it would be nice if the NIV stayed with that so that we could see the continuity of it. So God's saying, you want to be rescued? I will free you. I will rescue you from being slaves to them. I will redeem you with an outstretched arm. And the arm of God and the hand of God come into play here in the Exodus event. And now we come to the punchline, at least for our class. I will redeem you with an outstretched arm, and you see the next few words, and with mighty acts of, and the NIV says, judgment, right? And I dare say that any other English translation that you have in your hand says judgment. Anybody have something different? I think I've looked at 20 or 30 trying to find a different one, and I can't find anybody who translates it different. The Hebrew term here is shaphat. It's used 18 times in the Old Testament. It's from shapat, our standard justice vocabulary, so it's right at the center of the justice vocabulary. It's in the plural, shapatim, and so you might translate it judgments with an S. Now I'm going to suggest a different translation. I'm going to suggest that we translate it justice, because the minute you translate it judgment, it's negative, isn't it? It's punishment. To use the big word, It's retributive justice. Do you remember the star of justice? And I'm going to suggest if we translate it justice, or justices, if you want to use the plural, of course that doesn't work in English, but if we translate it justice, then the question is it distributive justice or is it retributive justice? And I'm going to read the text carefully with you and suggest that in this passage that what we have here is probably distributive justice. It's God rescuing, it's God delivering, it's not God punishing, although that's clearly off to the side. Now verse 7, I will take you as my own people, and I will be your God. Then you will know, so it's not just Pharaoh who's going to know something, but it's also the Israelites. Then you will know that I am the Lord your God who brought you out from under the yoke of the Egyptians. Now I'll say it here, and later when we get to the Ten Commandments, I'll say it again. It's interesting that this is the way that God identifies himself. You will know that I am the Lord your God, and who am I? And when God identifies himself in the scriptures of Israel, generally speaking, he will say something like, I am the God who brought you out from under bondage. I am the God who brought you out of slavery. I am the God who brought you out of Egypt. I am the God who brought you out from under the yoke of the Egyptians. Something like that, which of course is a mighty act of justice. So now, you see where I'm going? If you say to God, who are you? He says, I am the God who puts my hand into space-time history and I deliver people from bondage and I bring them into the land. I am a God who does justice. Is that how you think of God? This is clearly the way the narrator of the Pentateuch presents Yahweh. Presents him primarily, if not solely, as the God of justice. Now there's hints of mercy, but it's never said directly that God is merciful. We do get that later. But it says that God is a God of justice. There's no talk at all of God being a God of love. That just doesn't happen. A God of holiness? Not yet. Not yet. That comes much later with the giving of the law. So the picture of God, if you're reading from within the story, and today we're reading from within the story as usual, if you're reading from within the story, the first readers of this who are reading from the beginning of the story and not reading things back into the story, the picture that's building up in their mind of Yahweh God is that he is a God who intervenes into space-time history to rescue people who are poor and oppressed from those who sit on them and squash them. And I say rhetorically, is that your God? Well, I mean, it may not be the whole, is it? But it's interesting at this point, this is the way God's presented. And this is the foundation for our understanding of God. He's a God who brings justice. Now there's certainly more to that, and we'll come to that, but that doesn't come yet. Now verse 8. And I will bring you into the land I swore with an uplifted hand to give to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob, and I will give it to you as a possession. I am the Lord. All right? Now, if you have the notes, and I hope you do have the notes, I want to ask you to look at page 2, and I've tried to lay out this passage that has 7 verbs. I will bring, I will free, that's rescue, I will redeem, I will take, I will be, I will bring, I will give. Do you see those 7 verbs? And I think they describe 3 acts. The first one, I will bring you out, I will rescue you, I will redeem you, has to do with what goes on in Egypt. The 2 middle verbs, I will take you as my own people and I will be your God, is what happens at Mount Sinai. We'll see that in Exodus chapter 24. God makes a treaty, God makes a covenant, and Israel becomes his people, and God becomes their God. It's right at the center. And then, I will bring you into the land, and I will give you possession, has to do with what God does, bringing them into Canaan, and we'll eventually get to that. So you've got 3 very large steps here in terms of the story and in terms of place. You move from Egypt to the desert, Sinai, and into the land. And so you got 7 verbs moving you out of Egypt, facing God with a covenant, making a covenant with him, or God's making a covenant with them, and then God taking them into the land. Now, what I want to suggest is that the mighty acts of judgment or the mighty acts of justice are associated clearly with this act of deliverance, so the vocabulary is there. And now I'm going to discuss with you in a little bit of detail, so I hope you brought coffee today and you drank it. Did you bring your coffee? Did you? If you haven't drunk your coffee yet, please don't let it get cold. Drink your coffee. You're going to need it. And I'm going to read some of this to you so that I won't get lost. And if you go to sleep, you can wake up and find the paragraph where I am. Before we consider the phrase with mighty acts of judgment, one might ask, just when did Israel in this scheme become the people of God? And I've already answered that. I think they become, in this sense, the people of God at Mount Sinai. Now, the next paragraph. The verbs bring out, free, it's rescue, and redeem are all parallel to each other and refer back to Moses' complaint about the Lord's failure to rescue. Note that redeem, in this context, refers to physical redemption from danger. Do you see that? This is rescue from being oppressed. So it's the physical side that's in focus. We will shortly hear redeem again in the Song of Moses, which celebrates the Lord's defeat of Pharaoh at the Red Sea. And again, it's used in a very physical, concrete sense of defeating Pharaoh. But how will they be rescued? The answer is that the Lord will free Israel by mighty acts of Shephatim. And here for the first time then in the story, we have explicit justice vocabulary applied to actions. So the action here of redeeming them, which that is of delivering them and bringing them out, it is explicitly called an act of justice. It's a Shephatim. Now for a bit of technical comment. We prefer the translation mighty acts of justice rather than mighty acts of judgment because this better communicates the possible range of meaning of the underlying Hebrew word shephet, which we have here in the plural. Using justice instead of judgment makes clear that the Exodus is viewed as part of the larger justice concept, and remember the star of justice, and leaves open the possibility, and this is why I'm interested in, that justice might be both retributive, judgment, and distributive, bringing them into the land, giving them possession of the land, delivering them out from underneath the hand of the Pharaoh, or perhaps just distributive in certain contexts. I base this possible understanding of Shephatim as distributive as well as retributive on the understanding of Shaphat group, the SPT group, which Schultz in the New International Dictionary Old Testament Exegesis following Leideke, in reference to the verb, but applicable to the whole of the group of the SPT, says, and here I quote him. Now this is worth the price of the lecture, so now listen, okay? I've worked hard to get to this, please. Wake up, one eye open. Here comes the punchline. This has really changed the way I've thought about justice, and if you get hold of it, it's got the possibility of transforming. I know dictionaries are a bit boring, all right? And I know that lectures are also a bit boring, but this is not boring, all right? So hang on, at least it's not boring for me. Schultz says that the SPT group, the Shaphat group, Shephatim comes from that, describes a range of actions that restore or preserve order in society so that justice, especially social justice, is guaranteed. And then he goes on to say, as a continuous activity, it, Shaphat, can be translated as rule, govern, and as a specific activity, it can be translated as deliver, rescue, or judge. Therefore, to translate this verb and its family members with judge or judgment without contextual consideration being assessed is not helpful. So what he's saying is that the SPT group, it does mean judge and judgment, that is retributive justice, all right? But the Shaphat group also means to rule, to govern, to put right, to rescue, to deliver. Do you follow that? If I can just step outside the scriptures of Israel for a minute and say that its Greek translation, krino, in Matthew chapter 12, where Isaiah 42 is translated to bring justice to the nations, has the same flavor. The King James says judgment to the nations, which makes it sound like the nations are being judged, doesn't it, being punished. But the NIV, which gets it right this time, says that he will bring justice to the nations. Doesn't that sound different? It opens up semantic possibilities that get closed down with judgment. So my argument here is that it has this possibility. Now the question is, what does it actually mean in the context? It's one thing to say it has this range of meanings. It's another thing to say, what does it mean in this particular context? So, what does Shephatim in Exodus 6:6 mean? It is almost universally translated judgment, or judgments, the Hebrew is plural, with the assumption that Shephatim refers to retributive judgment about to fall upon Egypt in the form of the plagues. And this is clearly the case where it's used in Exodus 12:12. Let me read the Exodus 12:12 passage, which we'll come back to later. On that same night, I will pass through Egypt and strike down every firstborn, both men and animals, and I will bring Shephatim on all the gods of Egypt. I am the Lord. Clearly there it has the sense of judgment. But I don't want to read back into Exodus 6:6, its use in Exodus 12:12. But is that so in Exodus 6:4 or in 7:4? Those are the three places where it's used in this story. Should we read back into Exodus 6:4, its use in Exodus 12:12? I'm not so sure. Once one realizes that Shephatim could have the positive sense of rescue as well as the negative sense of punish, and when one rereads Exodus 6:6-8 in light of the understanding of the SPT family just sketched out, I think then it becomes clear that all of the verbs in Exodus 6:6-8 are positive. They're not negative. They're not talking about punishment. So I'm trying to read the passage contextually with the possibility that Shephatim could be a positive statement rather than a negative statement. So let me read the passage again and follow along and see if you understand at least where I'm trying to take you. All 7 verbs, I'm going to read them then as positive and therefore understand Shephatim as a positive statement, not a negative one. I will bring you out from under the yoke of the Egyptians. Now, it presupposes he's going to have to punish them to do that, but that's not what it's saying. I mean, we know there's 2 sides to this. There's the negative side, the retributive justice in the plagues, which we'll come to shortly, that breaks the power of Egypt. But then there's the distributive justice that takes hold of Israel and brings them out. So God has one hand. With the backside, he smashes Egypt. With the palm side, with the gentle side, he takes hold of Israel that's been oppressed and lifts them up and restores them into community. So the same hand has 2 sides, and I'm suggesting here that it's the restorative side of the hand of God that's in focus in this text. I will bring you out from under the yoke of the Egyptians. I will rescue you from being slaves to them. I will redeem you with an outstretched arm and with mighty acts of justice. I will take you as my own people. I will be your God. I will bring you into the land. I will give you possession of the land. I think all 7 of these are positive statements. I'll rescue you. I will be your God. I'll bring you into the land. Now, the judgment's there. There's no doubt about that. So it seems possible that Exodus 6:6-8 is entirely about positive deliverance, bringing out, freeing, redeeming, taking, covenanting, bringing him into the land. Now, what about the use of Shephatim in Exodus 7:4, which is the other one? So if you want to turn with me to Exodus 7:4, we will have looked at all 3 uses of Shephatim: 6:6, 7:4, and 12:12. 12:12 is very clear. It's negative. 6, I'm arguing, is positive. 7, well, 7's a bit difficult. Look at 7 verse 1. Then the Lord said to Moses, see, I have made you like God to Pharaoh, and your brother Aaron will be your prophet. You are to say everything I command you, and your brother Aaron is to tell Pharaoh to let the Israelites go out of the country. Now let's just remind ourselves that Moses brings justice by talking. All right? Moses brings justice by talking. Verse 3, but I will harden Pharaoh's heart. Now don't ask me about that. Though I multiply my miraculous signs and wonders, and we want to hold on to that little phrase, signs and wonders. That echoes right through all the rest of the scriptures, right into the book of Revelation. So that becomes very important language for us. Though I multiply my signs and wonders in Egypt, he will not listen to you. And of course, we talked about this last week. Moses said, the problem with being called to be a bringer of justice who talks is that I can't talk very well, and besides, I don't think people will listen. I mean, if you're a bringer of justice and you go into a situation to talk people into justice, they need to listen, don't they? And here's Pharaoh, Moses saying again, he won't listen. Pharaoh's not going to listen. Then, says God, I will lay my hand on Egypt. Now here comes the hand. And with mighty acts of Shephatim, there's our term, I will bring out my divisions, my people, the Israelites, and the Egyptians will know that I am the Lord when I stretch out my hand against Egypt and bring the Israelites out of it. Now the question, and it's not entirely obvious in English, but it would be clear in the Hebrew, but it's clear enough in the English, is that the phrase, with mighty acts of judgment, to what does it refer? Does it refer to the act of smashing Egypt with the plagues, or does it refer to the act of delivering Israel? And I've looked at the commentaries who fuss with the Hebrew on this and the grammar. They're actually not very helpful. Grammatically, it could go either way. It could go either way on this one. So I think this one's open. So to summarize, I take 6:6 as positive. Mighty act of justice means to bring out. It's a positive act. It's distributive. I take 7:4 to be ambiguous. I take 12:12 to be retributive. Right? You say, oh, the word's used differently. Yes, but we use words differently all the time, don't we? And it's only the context that tells us what they mean. Now, it's not just here that we have the Exodus event described as an act of justice. I want to step outside the story for a minute and cheat and look at two passages. First, 1 Samuel 12:7, and it's in your notes. If you'd like to turn there, that'd be fine. 1 Samuel 12:7. It is the Lord who appointed Moses and Aaron and brought your forefathers up out of Egypt. Now then, stand here, because I'm going to confront you with evidence before the Lord as to all the righteous acts. Now, this is the other vocabulary that we've looked at. This is the SDQ vocabulary, not the SPT, but they are parallel. As to all the righteous acts performed by the Lord for you and your fathers. What are these righteous acts, these acts of justice? After Jacob entered Egypt, they cried to the Lord for help, and the Lord sent Moses and Aaron, who brought your forefathers, out of Egypt and settled them in this place. Do you see that? So the Exodus event is clearly being labeled a righteous act. And it's the positive side of it here that's in focus. I brought your forefathers out of Egypt. The other one that's even sharper because it uses both vocabulary sets is Psalm 103, verse 5 and 6. He satisfies my desire with good things so that your youth is renewed like eagles. The Lord works righteousness and justice. So we've got both terms here used in parallel. For all the oppressed, you see which way righteousness and justice is going, don't you? It's to help the people who are being oppressed. That's what justice does. Justice helps the people who suffer injustice. And when did he do that? He made known his ways to Moses, his deeds to the people of Israel. And there's no real doubt that the great deed that he made known was the Exodus. And so we have two texts later in the story that look back and they understand this as an act of justice. So let me just pause for a minute and say, The greatest act in the whole of Israel's history, the event to which every Israelite, including Jesus, looks back as the formative event. Now, that doesn't exclude Abraham and his call, but the really formative event for them as a people, God building a just society, is the Exodus coupled with the law and the tabernacle. And that event is understood, is labeled as a justice event. Now, I'm not quite sure how hard to lean on this and press this and what inferences to make from it. As a biblical theologian, I don't want to go beyond the evidence, but I would dare say that at least there's a hint here that justice is central. You sense that? That justice is central. I'm not quite sure how you would prove the center of anything in a literary sense. People have argued about the center of the Bible. I go around that issue. I talk about means and goals. I don't talk about centers. I don't think that's helpful. And so I'm not going to do that here. But clearly, God's work is labeled as a justice work. Now, if that's the distributive side, I want very briefly to look at the retributive side. And we've already read the passage in 12:12, where he says he's going to bring retribution against the gods of Egypt. And that would also be implicit in the other ones. By bringing this sort of retribution against them, he is making himself known. Now let's look at this. We've already seen this, so I'm just going to pick it up in two passages. Look again at Exodus chapter 6 and verse 7, which is the tail end of the long passage we've just been reading. After he does all these things of putting his hand into space-time history to do acts of justice, he says the result of this will be, I will take you as my own people, and I will be your God. Then you will know that I am the Lord your God. They come to know God through his act of justice bringing. They come to know God through his act of justice bringing. I think that's a hypothesis worth holding on to and seeing if it works all the way through the storyline. How do we know God? We know God through his justice-bringing activity. Now, that's not the only way we know God, but it's here a central way, that we know God through his concern to bring justice to his people. Now, I'm tempted to skate forward and start quoting passages from Jesus and Paul. Can you see them? Well, we'll get there, all right? But here you can already see it. They know God through his justice-bringing activity. But they're not the only ones. Look at 7:5. Now, we read this before too, but let's underline it now. And the Egyptians, so it's not just the Israelites, and the Egyptians will know that I am the Lord when I stretch out my hand against Egypt and bring the Israelites out of it. So it's not just Israel that will know God, it's also the Egyptians that will know God. And we'll come to this a little later in the next talk. It's interesting, in the King James, which is what I grew up on, so you'll forgive me for having King James in my head, but in the King James, there's a mixed multitude. You know these people who go out with them? Who are they? Well, nobody knows for sure, but they're not Israelites. Some of them may be Egyptians or other people who have been enslaved by the Egyptians. We'll talk about that. But other people are coming to know God through this mighty act. And I've given you a long string of reference here in the notes to Pharaoh and the Egyptians coming to know God. Now, I want to look at 12:12 just briefly and think about how this works. 12:12. Do you find 12:12? It's a stunning passage where he says, on that same night I will pass through Egypt and strike down every firstborn, both men and animals, and I will bring Shephatim, it's our word, on the gods. Do you see that? On the gods of Egypt. I am the Lord. I thought he was bringing it on Pharaoh and the Egyptians, right? But here the text says, and it's repeated verbatim in Numbers 33:4, I'm bringing Shephatim, I'm bringing judgment, retributive justice, against the gods. And for me, this little text and its cousin over in Numbers 33 just opens up an enormous window on what's really going on in this traditional world. And that is that although we have Pharaoh opposed to Moses, and we have Pharaoh's magicians, and we have Moses with Aaron, and maybe the elders, and although there's confrontation between these at the physical, visible level, we're told here that there's also going on that the gods of Egypt are being confronted by Yahweh. And so there's a confrontation at this level. And so there's I started to say two confrontations. It's really one confrontation going on with two parts. There's the physical part that everybody could see, but there's also the part against the gods, which we don't see too well, but I think the Egyptians and the Israelites saw this because they understood the world from a traditional point of view in which the physical and the spiritual were distinguishable but not separable. So they understood very clearly that if the army of Pharaoh is drowned in the Red Sea, that it must be because the God of the Israelites is stronger than the God of the Egyptians. You see the logic? And so the gods were shown to be impotent. Now, I certainly don't have time to do it here, but there's a fascinating book, and I will put it on my Facebook We Read. Some of you haven't discovered my Facebook We Read yet, and I'm going to put two really good questions on the discussion section and send them around to you. I'm still trying to get you into the Facebook mode of things here. But I'm going to put up Davies' book on the gods of Egypt, and he goes through very carefully and shows you that each one of the plagues is aimed at a particular Egyptian god. All right? It's a fascinating study. So each one of the plagues is aimed at a particular Egyptian god, and of course, when the firstborn is killed, Pharaoh's son, who's the heir to the throne, and Pharaoh is a deity himself in that sense, and so you have his son, the son of God, is struck down, and so Amun-Re, the sun god, the chief god in that group of large group of gods, is struck down. And so all the gods, all the way up to the top, are struck down. And everybody who reads this story, and next week we'll talk about Jethro's reading of it, and then later Rahab's reading of it, and then even 600 years people are still hearing this story. Everybody who heard this story would immediately know within the traditional world that the gods of Egypt had been shown to be lesser than Yahweh God. That Yahweh God had overcome them and had triumphed over them in what I would call a monistic power confrontation. Right? Now, I'm tempted to go off and ask all kinds of other questions about this and go meddling here and there, but I think it's certainly worth thinking about this from the missiological point of view. That when the gospel is presented, that it's not just, our God against their God. There is also a physical level to this sort of thing. And so my hunch, and I will sharpen that up as we go along, that the signs and wonders that go along with the proclamation of God, that those signs and wonders, those physical things, they demonstrate that Yahweh God is a true and living God. Huh? And so the signs and wonders are integral to a good missiological theology. Now, I'm not doing a missiological theology as such, although in paths of righteousness for his name's sake. You see where we're going, don't you? It clearly has very powerful missiological implications. So, let me just summarize for a second and catch our breath. The justice event is labeled, the Exodus event is clearly labeled a justice event, both within the storyline 3 times, 6:6, 7:4, 12:12, At least one of them may be a very positive distributive. One of them, 12:12 clearly, is retributive. 7:4, it could go either way, or maybe goes both ways. There may be ambiguity in the text there. But the Exodus event is understood as a justice event, both in the text and later in the Psalms and in 1 Samuel and probably elsewhere also. This event is understood within its cultural context as a monistic event where it's not just a physical happening, but it's understood that these things are happening physically, that Moses is overcoming Pharaoh because the Lord is overcoming the gods of Egypt. And that in this, the Lord is making himself known, so that he's a powerful God who brings justice. Now, I'd like to go back and look at this that I've written on the board that you've been staring at since the beginning of class, and tell you how I fit some things together here. What we're looking at here is a mighty act of justice. Do you see that? This is a mighty act of justice. This event, this mighty act of justice event, will very shortly be proclaimed to Jethro. Moses will go and meet his father-in-law Jethro, and in the next talk we'll talk in detail about that. And Moses, for the first time, proclaims Yahweh, the God who brings justice, to an outsider. We've already had him proclaimed to Israel, we've already had him proclaimed to Egypt, and then we're going to go outside of this setting and have him proclaimed to Jethro, and there'll be others, Rahab, and so on down the line. I'm going to suggest that the mighty acts and the proclamation of justice, that they come together, and when they come together, they form a just society, so that the birth of Israel as a society happens at Sinai when the mighty acts have been put in place and the proclamation of justice has been put in place. The primary proclamation of justice, of course, is the proclamation of the law, coupled with the proclamation of the tabernacle. And in terms of the star of justice, do you remember the star of justice? Some of you may have forgotten it, so I would just draw it, all right? The star of justice, it's worth remembering. I'm trying to think of things that will be memorable. Has 5 points: forensic, that is, God as judge declares. We have retributive justice. We've seen that today. The plagues are retributive justice par excellence, aren't they? That becomes the standard term for it. Distributive justice, which is accomplished by the hand of God, is the picking up of Israel and bringing them out and bringing them into the land. It goes all the way. And then we have the standard of justice, and we have conduct in conformity to that standard. All of this has to be done fairly. We talked about that last week. So here what we have is the standard of justice being proclaimed at Sinai. And then we'll have the tabernacle also spoken of. And the tabernacle, have you ever had trouble reading the tabernacle passages? It's a little boring, isn't it? Now, you know, I mean, the Bible shouldn't be boring, should it? I mean, we believe that. And when you get to Leviticus, some of us stopped reading the Bible about Leviticus 15 and said, another day, right? That was my experience. And Leviticus is also about, once you get inside the tabernacle, what do the priests do and what do they offer? You know this, don't you? We'll take this up in talks 14, 15, 16, and so on. But I want to suggest for you, if the law is the standard of justice, the tabernacle is the place to obtain justice in all of its fullness. Forensic, you get forgiveness. The standard is taught at the tabernacle by the priest. If you come and pray at the tabernacle, you can get deliverance. It becomes very, very clear later in Solomon's talk about the temple when he builds a temple. But the tabernacle is going to be seen, at least I will see it, as a place to obtain justice. And so we have the mighty act of justice, which is the Exodus event. And when you have the Exodus event coupled with the proclamation of the law and of the tabernacle, and they're also going to proclaim the Exodus event itself to people like Jethro, and we'll come and take that up next time. But when you have this mighty act coupled with this proclamation, then it results in the formation of a just society. And I will call all of this the task, the job. It used to be the mission, but I've changed it to task. The task of the bringer of justice. What does the bringer of justice do? The bringer of justice does mighty acts of justice, signs and wonders, proclaims justice in the law. At the tabernacle, it's going to be proclaimed and set up. The events of it, such as the Exodus, will be proclaimed. And when you bring these together out in the desert, they form a society, and God makes a covenant with them to make a just society. And then I'm going to suggest, you can see where I'm going, that this is understood, these three parts, that the task has three distinguishable but not separable parts. Right? Three distinguishable but not separable parts. And what I've just said, if it's even 5% true, we'll have to completely rewrite most of our understanding of what the church is about. But that's a long ways off, isn't it? So we'll hold that for now. But let me just say it again. I can see some of you are sleeping, so I'm trying to wake you up, all right? If, that the task of the bringer of justice has three parts: mighty acts, proclamation, formation of just society, all right? And that these are distinguishable, but they're not separable, and that they form then, when you put them together, they form one witness to the outside world. So that the witness of Israel to the outside world is dependent on mighty acts of justice, on the proclamation of justice, and on the formation of a just society. Now, different aspects of that are to the fore at different periods in the history of Israel. All right, the proclamation of justice, although you have it to Jethro and to Rahab, it doesn't really become prominent until a little later on. The formation of a just society will be absolutely fundamental to the law and the giving of the law. That's why the law is given, so as to create that sort of society, so as to be a witness to the outside world. But the witness to the outside world, in order for it to work, has to have mighty acts, it has to have verbal proclamation, it has to have a society that is structured. It's a structural question, not just individual behavior. A society whose structural shape, and this is what the book of Deuteronomy is all about. It's not about personal ethics, it's about political structure. It's about economic structure. All right? We'll come to that. That the structure of the people of God is absolutely radical compared to the ancient Near East. And next March, I will try to demonstrate that to you, all right? I'm up early every morning at 5 o'clock trying to think about that. I've stumbled on a Jewish book just published that actually believes that, and he's an expert in the ancient Near East. I'm so happy because I'm not an expert in Mesopotamian and Egyptian and Hittite culture. I do not read Akkadian, I do not read hieroglyphs, I do not read all these sort of things, and it would be nice to read those. I'm not an Old Testament scholar. I'm poaching here, but it's nice poaching. So but this is dynamite, because what is going to happen, and I'm cheating. I want to keep you interested. What is going to happen is that when Israel gets formed, it looks like this, and everybody else in the ancient Near Eastern neighborhood looks like this. Do you understand my symbols? If you go to Egypt, there are not only pyramids there, the society is pyramidical. Pharaoh and the priests own everything. When you go to Mesopotamia, The Code of Hammurabi, there's a double system. There's one law for the rich and another law for everybody else, all right? And the whole ancient Near East was pyramidical. And Berman, this is Joshua Berman, is the Jewish guy I'm talking about, argues that Israel was meant to be like this, and he argues he says clearly everybody in the ancient Near East, to quote him, did not believe that humans were created equal. He says nobody believed that in ancient Near East. Nobody believed that all humans were created equal. Now, I don't think the Bible actually talks in rights terminology, and so I won't talk in human rights terminology. I think that maybe is a correct inference from the text, but it's not the way the text talks about it, so I will use a little different jargon than Berman, because he's trying to bridge from Israel over into America and to try to make some connections, but that's a little different story.